The crucifixion of Jesus, it's a story we all think we know, right? We've seen the paintings, we've heard the stories, but what happens when you look past all that and examine it through two totally different lenses: modern forensic science and ancient theology? That's what we're going to do. We're going to dive into what each one tells us, from the unbelievable physical agony to the profound spiritual weight. So, let's get into it. Okay, so let's just start with a really direct, almost clinical question that cuts right through centuries of art and symbolism. How does a person actually die from crucifixion? Forensic pathologists have looked at this in incredible detail, and the answer, well, it reveals the brutal engineered reality of this Roman execution method. And you can see the contrast right here, and it is stark. On the one hand, you have the art we're all used to seeing, serene, noble, almost clean. But on the other hand, you have the forensic reality, and that's a world of hypovolemic shock, which is massive blood loss, systemic organ failure, agonizing nerve pain, and finally, a slow, grueling death by suffocation. That huge gap between those two images is exactly what we're here to explore. Now, to really understand the end of this story, we actually have to go back to the beginning of the ordeal, a garden called Gethsemane. And the name itself is a massive clue. See, it's not just a place, it's a symbol for the immense pressure that's about to come down. The very first physical trauma that's recorded is a condition called hematidrosis, put simply, sweating blood. And you might think, is that even possible? Well, forensic analysis says yes, absolutely. It's a rare but documented medical thing. It's triggered by anguish so extreme that the body's tiny capillaries in the sweat glands literally burst, mixing blood with sweat. This isn't presented as a miracle, it's the body's physical response to just overwhelming psychological torment. And this is where our two lenses, the scientific and the spiritual, just click together perfectly. The name Gethsemane, it comes from the Aramaic Gethsemane, which literally means oil press. This was a place where olives were put under these massive stone wheels to be crushed to squeeze out their oil. The physical place itself is this powerful metaphor for the spiritual crushing Jesus was going through, a pressure so intense it was literally breaking his body. And right in the middle of all that pressure, we get this incredibly raw prayer: "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." The two words that we really have to zoom in on here are cup and will. They are the absolute theological heart of this whole moment. So you're probably asking, what's he talking about? The cup? Well, this wasn't just some random word. Jesus was pulling from deep Old Testament imagery that his followers would have known instantly. In books like Isaiah and Jeremiah, the cup was the symbol for the fate you had to drink, specifically the cup of God's judgment against sin. So he's not just asking to avoid pain. He's asking if there is any other way to absorb the weight of all human wrongdoing. Okay, so this brings up a huge theological question, right? Is Jesus arguing with God here? Is he having second thoughts? Well, Christian theology says no, not at all. This moment is seen as showing two wills in one person. The prayer, "remove this cup," is his genuine human will. I mean, who wouldn't want to avoid that kind of suffering? But the second part, "not my will, but yours," is his rational human will choosing to align itself perfectly with the divine mission. It's a picture of perfect submission, not rebellion. So after the immense spiritual agony in the garden, the ordeal turns brutally physical. We're now shifting away from theology for a moment and into a purely clinical look at the trauma that was inflicted before the cross. We're entering the science of torture. Forensic reports show this wasn't just random chaotic violence. No, it was a clear, escalating series of traumas. You have the scourging, then the crown of thorns, then forcing him to carry the crossbeam. It was a systematic process designed to push the body into a state of catastrophic medical shock before the execution even really began. So the scourging, this was done with something called a flagrum, which was a Roman whip with pieces of bone and metal tied into it. It was designed to rip the flesh. According to forensic pathologists, this would have caused massive, immediate blood and fluid loss, throwing the body right into hypovolemic shock. That's a state where you've lost so much blood, your heart can't pump enough to your body. It leads to weakness, tremors, fainting. You get the picture. And the crown of thorns, we've all seen pictures, but there's a specific medical diagnosis for the kind of pain this would have caused. The thorns would have been long and sharp, piercing the scalp and pressing down on the major trigeminal nerves. This causes something called trigeminal neuralgia, which doctors describe as one of the most severe pain syndromes known to humanity. It's like searing, electric shocks firing across your face. And the trauma wasn't just on the outside. The brutal beating from the scourging would have caused fluid to build up in the lining around the lungs, a condition called pleural effusion. This would have made every single breath an agonizing, gasping effort. His body was already starting to shut down, long before he was ever lifted onto the cross. And all of that happened before the crucifixion itself even began. You have to remember, the Romans had perfected this over centuries. It wasn't just about causing pain, it was an engineered system designed for a slow, public, and agonizing death. So let's look at the mechanics. Let's just make this super real for a second. Forensic reports, based on actual archaeological finds, detail the tools they used. The Roman execution squad used these large spike-like nails that were about this long. That one brutal detail just moves this whole thing from an abstract story to a very concrete physical reality. Crucifixion was a cold, methodical procedure. First, the victim's thrown backwards onto the crosspiece on the ground. The hands are nailed. Then, that whole crosspiece, with the person attached, is hoisted up and slammed into a slot on the main upright post. And finally, the knees are bent and the feet are nailed flat. Every step was brutally efficient. And here's a wild little fact. The pain from this specific method of execution was so unique, so completely beyond the normal human experience, that it actually gave birth to a new word in the Latin language. Our word excruciating literally means out of the cross. The horror of the act itself defined our very word for the worst imaginable agony. So after his exhaustive research, Dr. Zagib, the forensic pathologist, came to a very clear clinical conclusion. He states the official cause of death was cardiac and respiratory arrest due to hypovolemic and traumatic shock due to crucifixion. It was a death caused by a total cascade of system failures, loss of blood, intense trauma, and the final crushing inability to breathe. All right, so we've looked through the forensic microscope at the science of suffering, and we've unpacked the ancient theology of a prayer in a garden. Now let's bring those two lenses together and see how they form a single, more complete picture. And you can see how perfectly they map onto each other right here. In Gethsemane, the forensic lens sees hematidrosis from extreme anguish. The theological lens sees the surrender of will in the oil press. During the torture, science diagnoses shock and nerve trauma. Theology sees that as bearing the weight of sin. And finally, on the cross, the clinical cause of death, asphyxiation and shock, becomes the theological moment of drinking the cup. Each view just adds a whole new layer of depth to the other. And it's so important to remember where the science part of this comes from. This isn't just a theory. The research we've been talking about has been presented to places like the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. This is the result of applying rigorous, evidence-based medical science to a historical event, giving us a clinical window into what really happened. And really, this is the whole point of our explainer today. Understanding the brutal clinical reality of what happened to the human body doesn't have to erase the spiritual meaning. In fact, for a lot of people, it's the opposite. The forensic details add this harrowing layer of physical depth to the theological claims. And that theological framework gives profound meaning to what was, by any measure, unimaginable suffering. So that's what we'll leave you with. For believers, for historians, for anyone really. Knowing the precise scientific mechanics of this death, from the capillaries bursting in a garden to the final failure of the heart and lungs, it doesn't have to diminish the event. It can magnify it. And the question it leaves us with is this: how does understanding the brutal science of what happened impact its spiritual meaning for you?